The Chainwheel Diaries podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Bartley Berlin. Copyright Brian Bartley Berlin, all rights reserved. Available on Apple and Spotify. Welcome, bike packers and bike travelers, to another episode of Chainwheel Diaries, stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I have a special treat for you today, but let's start with some trivia. Think you know everything about George Washington? Not the first president of the United States, but the town of about 900 people in western Washington state. That's right, there's a George, Washington. And my guest today, Chris Compton, has overnighted in George, Washington, en route to completing his epic corner-to-corner bike ride across America. He's even met the mayor of George, and we've got some great video for you at the end. But first, we'll revisit some clips from my first two interviews with Chris in February as he laid out his plan to ride across the U.S. and his motivation for doing so, which is really awesome. And then a live stream we did together April 29th when he began his journey. Finally, the interview where Chris tells the story of his epic adventure, followed by a bonus feature. And now, on to the show.
I started rolling around in my head 8 or 10 months ago that I wanted to do a cross-country bicycle ride. And the reason that I want to do it is specifically the connection and adventure part. Every day on a long bicycle trip, you make connections. Or I do. I can't say that everyone will, but I think that you will. I think if you've never done this, if you go on a 3-day bicycle trip, you're going to talk to more strangers than you've talked to in the last couple of months.
If you follow Chainwheel Diaries podcast, then you've already met Chris Compton, who is about to undertake an epic bike ride adventure from Miami, Florida to Seattle, Washington. And today is the day Chris begins that epic journey. And we're live with Chris. He's in Miami. He's at his starting point. Chris, so excited to have you on this live broadcast. How are you feeling?
I couldn't be any happier, Brian. I have to be two of me.
All right. Tell everybody exactly where you are.
I'm at the beach in Fort Lauderdale, just north of Miami. My friend Cleo brought my bike down, and so I flew into Fort Lauderdale where her house is and picked up my bike. And I don't see any reason to ride back to Miami. So I'm starting in Fort Lauderdale.
How far are you going to go today, Chris? What's your plan?
I'm going to go north, Brian. I don't know if you can see, I'm dipping the tire as we speak. I'm going to go north about 40 or 50 miles. I got a late start today. We'll see what happens.
There's no rush today. This is the first day. You can take your time, enjoy the ride. The important thing is that you get going and start pedaling.
You're right. None of it's a race, Brian. It's all to be enjoyed. It's a leisurely stroll. We don't get to do it for very long. And I'm just so grateful and excited to be able to give this a shot. And I'll look forward to updating you.
Welcome back to the podcast, Chris. You did it. You rode your bicycle from Fort Lauderdale to Seattle, Washington, 90 days. And I know bicyclers crisscross the United States all the time, but that doesn't take anything away from your accomplishment. It's amazing. And I can't wait to hear some of your stories.
Well, thanks, Brian. I did it. And it's still kind of surreal, actually. It almost feels like a dream.
What impressed me about your videos, and I watched almost all of them, is the way you embraced your setbacks with hugely positive attitude, and it was really inspiring. And what I'm referring to is right away you got lost, and
I did
it was a setback. Tell me about it.
a little bit. Yeah. Um, and I was using at the time, I was navigating with a combination of Komoot and Google Maps, both of which have strengths and weaknesses. And on this particular day, Google Maps really, really wanted me to go into this little, I guess, a nature preserve, a state-owned wildlife preserve area, like a park. It was kind of like going into the wilderness, except I had my cell phone right there in my hand, and I knew that I was this far from the road. So I go into this wilderness facility, and it was like the Roach Motel. You know, roaches check in, but they can't check out. I found an elevated wooden shelter, and it wasn't raining at the time, but it looked like it might start raining again. And I just laid down and took a nap in this shelter. It was great. Really enjoyed it. And when I woke up, I looked at Google Maps and it wanted me to continue further into the state area. So I looked at Komoot, and Komoot said, "Oh, yeah, that's a fine idea. Just go that way. You're going to be good." So I started heading that way, and I'm riding the bike, and it's not groomed trails, it's not paved trails, it's ruts where trucks have gone through grass, and it's grass this high, and there's canals everywhere. And once I got into this area and got into the canal part, I would be riding along 4 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, and I would ride a mile and a half with canals on both sides, looking at my map, looking for this one particular road that'll get me out, and then boom, I'd run into a canal and I got nowhere to go. It's like a fun house. And I did this for a couple of hours. And I stopped and I recorded my thoughts about it and I laughed and I took pictures of a sign on a gate. I came to a gate at late in the day. I came to a gate and that was the road that both of my map softwares wanted me to go out on. And it's a huge gate, barbed wire on both sides, and a sign that says, you know, private property, no trespassing, don't come this way. And then there's a big sign in the background with a picture of a bull, and it said, he can get to the fence in 2.6 seconds. Can you? And I was just stop. And I found the whole thing funny because I was really this far from roads and I could see it on my GPS and I couldn't figure out how to get there. And eventually, well, the first thing I did was I unloaded my bicycle and I put everything on the other side of that gate. And I picked my bicycle up and I put that on the other side of the gate. And I loaded it back up and I started to ride down what Google Maps and Komoot thought was my exit path, ignoring the private property sign. Sorry. And I immediately came to these huge piles of cow manure. They were like pizza boxes stacked up and they're enormous. And after about a dozen of them, I came around the corner and I saw the herd. And this was my first up close exposure to cows on the trip and maybe ever. I'm not a farm guy. And I came around the corner and there's all these cows and they're enormous. And in my head, they were all that 2.6 second bull cow. And I didn't want any of that. So I turned around and rode back and went back over the fence. And I tried for about another half an hour or so to figure out my way out of there. And finally, I just said, I'm not getting out tonight. I mean, it was 6:30. I was tired, and it started to hit me that I hadn't eaten. And so I decided I was just going to have to spend the night in there. And this was, once I said, day 2 of the trip, and I had not actually camped in a tent since I was 12. Never camped by myself, never been out in the middle of nowhere like this. It was really quite interesting. But I set everything up, and my only real concern was I was camping right next to one of those canals, and I knew that there must be alligators in it. I mean, I was in southern Florida. There have to be alligators in those canals. And I thought, well, if an alligator comes up the bank of this canal to get to my tent, I'll just put the bike. I'll lay the bike on the bank of the canal. So I laid the bike between the canal water and my tent, and that was my alarm system. And if in the middle of the night an alligator had slammed into my bike, I was going to jump out and spray him with bear spray.
But you survived, and you weren't discouraged. I really admire your mindset and your attitude. So now you've got your first major hiccup behind you, and I know that you found your way out, and you're back on the road, and you're headed towards Alabama.
One of the big early checkpoints in this ride was a music festival in outside of Auburn, Alabama, in Opelika. And after that music festival, I could have either gone west towards Memphis or I could have gone north towards Nashville. And I chose to go north because a friend of mine had a lake house in Alabama. So I kind of rode north through Alabama up to Weiss Lake and then over to Huntsville. And those climbs were really something. Going to Huntsville, I had to go through Lake Guntersville, and Lake Guntersville sits in a valley between two huge peaks. So I had several, you know, 500 feet at a time climbs. And that may not sound like a lot, but I didn't really prepare to climb 500 feet at a time. It's not something I have ever done in my life. So when I first encountered it, my my little bike computer would say climb, and I'd look down, it would say feet to go, 580. And I was like, really? How are you gonna do that? But it just turned out all I had to do was pedal. Um, but when I left Alabama, when I left Huntsville, that day I rode up into Tennessee. And Tennessee was a state where I expected the peaks to be more severe than they were. There were there was definitely an up and down kind of state. There were definitely a lot of elevation changes, and there were some climbs. But after Alabama, they all seemed pretty easy. One of the things that was interesting in Tennessee, I had a friend that I stayed with in Auburn, Alabama, and he was instrumental. He knew the Alabama roads really well. And when I left his house, we sat down with my Komoot map and he gave me some guidance. We looked at it, and Komoot doesn't have any problem sending you on a dirt road. And he looked at the Komoot route and he said, okay, this dirt road is fine. You'll be fine on this one, but this one you want to avoid. And we reconfigured to do that. And then another thing, this is my friend Scott Mount. Another thing that Scott did was he reached out to some people in Tennessee to see if anybody might be willing to host me. And so that was just one of the little chain events that happened for me where I reconnected with my friend Scott, and that ended up with me staying at someone's house in Nashville, Tennessee, Brian Oliver. And these little things happened all through the trip where I would meet one person and they would make a suggestion and I would take that suggestion and it would lead on this path of things that wouldn't have otherwise happened. Um, Not to skip too far ahead, but a really good story that we don't want to miss happened in North Dakota. And in North Dakota, I was riding in the rain. It was raining, maybe the hardest rain of the trip. And I knew it was coming all day long. I was riding towards, um, but I was riding, I think it's Hazleton. And I'm riding towards Hazleton and I'm wet and it's raining really hard. And my original plan that day was I thought I would camp in the city park because they allowed camping. But once I got wet, I thought, well, maybe I'll just keep on going because I have plenty of time till sunset. It doesn't get dark till late. As the further west you go, it seems like and the further north you go, you just have forever. Some nights you could ride till 9:45, 10 o'clock. But I thought I'll just keep going. I'm already wet. There's no need to stop and set up my tent in this wetness. And a pickup truck slowed down as I was setting up a camera to tape myself riding in this rainstorm. A pickup truck slowed down and he pulled up, and it was raining so hard he didn't want to roll his window down. So he's leaning up over the top of his window to talk to me. And this guy is a man named Joe Shea, and he's in his 70s, really nice guy. And he asked me some questions about what I was doing. And he suggested that I put my bike in the back of his truck and he would get me out of the rain. Well, I at the time had never heard the term EFI. I heard it later in my trip, but I was kind of the mindset that my bicycle was going to roll on the ground from where I left to the Space Needle, and it wasn't going in any trucks. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yep.
some people they move all over the place with vehicles and skip and backtrack, and that's fine. And, everybody has to have their own ride. But in my mindset, I didn't want to skip that 3 or 4 miles and go in a truck. It makes no sense at all. But that's where I was. Um, and he said, well, fine. He didn't understand that, but he said, well, fine. Well, when you get into town, we'll get you out of the rain. Why don't you come to our house? And I said, okay, what's your address? He said, I don't know, which I thought was pretty funny. But only 200 people live in the town. And he said, we're the brick house next to the Catholic Church. So I rode into town. I found the Catholic Church. There's a brick house next to it. There's Joe standing on his porch. He's looking for me. So he got me out of the rain. He put my bike in his garage and he took me somewhere to get me something to eat. We came back to his house and I met his wife, and they were the most delightful people. They'd never picked anybody up on the street like this before. Not something they probably would have thought of doing. They never met me. I've never met them. And they put me up in their house, took me to get some food, brought me back. We had a nice conversation. Then Pat told me about everybody in her family. She showed me pictures. We had about an hour conversation. I felt like I was part of the family. And they had living quarters down in their basement. So they put me down there. I was able to dry all my clothes, charge all my stuff. It was a great night. And when I got up the next morning, she fixed me fried eggs for breakfast. He showed me around the Catholic Church. And then I left. Great experience. Later on that day, maybe I'm 35 or 40 miles into my ride. It's very windy that day. It was a tough ride. The wind is harder than the hills, Brian. The wind is way harder than the hills.
Yes, it
Tough
is.
ride. And I'm going along and I feel a car coming up behind me. I don't have a mirror. Oh, probably mixed feelings on mirrors. I didn't have a mirror for this trip. But I could feel the car coming up next to me and I turned to look and I thought I recognized the truck, and it slowed down and the window rolled down and there's Joe. He and his wife had driven 35 or 40 miles on the route they thought I was taking to see if I was okay. Now, this is pretty nice, right?
That is
So we
simply
chatted a bit on
amazing.
the side of the road and I continued my ride. Well, that night, Joe calls me and he says, hey, we've been looking at the route that you say you're going on, and we have relatives all over the Northwest, and I'm wondering where you're going to be staying, tomorrow night. And I said, I don't know. I really don't think that far ahead. It's just kind of every day. It's like a book. I get up, I just see what happens that day. He said, well, if you want to, he said that there's an abbey in, I think it's Richardson, North Dakota, and that's I went to high school there. And remember, Joe is in his late 70s. So he went to high school there a long time ago. He said, I went to high school there, and there's still a couple of monks there that were there when I went to high school.
Amazing.
I said, well, that would be incredible. I can't imagine staying. I mean, wouldn't you like to stay somewhere with monks? I mean, it just sounds awesome, right? When are you going to get to do that? So that night, I asked somebody if I could sleep in their yard. I was over that by now. So I camped in somebody's yard. And then the next day, I rode to the Abbey. And the monks took me in. Father Odo and Brother Placid. Father Odo is 85, and I think he could beat me in a foot race. And Brother Flat Placid's 89, and they've both been at the same monastery for like 60 years.
Wow.
And it's a huge, big, beautiful facility. Um, I was able to tour it around. It's a 4-story building. I had the basement almost to myself. I don't think anybody else was staying down there. Somebody came down to do laundry. And so I had 2 meals there. The food was fantastic. It was just a beautiful experience. And that just came from my connection to Joe, but Joe wasn't done yet. So I did the Abbey, and then I continued on, and the next part of my journey included my friend Harold, who came out in his Tesla, and we can talk about the people that supported me. But let's keep going with this stream. So I had my Harold phase, and then I get a call from Joe, and he said, "Are you going through Glacier National Park?" And my original route, Brian, did not have me going anywhere that far north. My route changed, and that also changed my conversation with a stranger. I would have never met Joe Shea if I hadn't had the conversation way back in outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, that got me to go further north than I expected to go. But Joe says, "Are you going to Glacier National Park?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be I'm going to be going right by it, and I'm sure I'll spend some time there." He said, "Well, my brother lives in East Glacier, and I
Hmm.
talked to him, and he'd be willing to host you." Great. So now when I get to East Glacier, which is right outside Glacier National Park, I hook up with Pete Shea. Pete takes me in like I'm part of the family. I get there, he's made dinner for me. We have a beautiful night. He went and took me to the lodge in East Glacier that the railroad company built. And a friend of his was there singing and playing the guitar. He stopped what he was doing, introduced Pete. Pete sat down and played 3 beautiful songs on the piano, classical music.
Wow.
We went back to his house, spent the night. The next day, Pete took me in his car and drove me 150 miles. We went all the way out to West Glacier, toured all of Glacier National Park in his car. He showed me the whole area. Another nice dinner, breakfast the next morning. And then when I left, I didn't ride through Glacier National Park because I had already seen it. I rode around Glacier National Park on Highway 2. That was one of the toughest parts of the ride. And it wasn't because the ride was difficult. That's the day I crossed the Continental Divide. It was because the traffic is really bad. There's nowhere to hide. There's a few places like that when you ride across the country, you're gonna get in situations like that. Highway 2 around Glacier National Park was one of the toughest parts of the ride for me. When I got on the other side, I rode to Columbia Falls, Montana, and I stayed with Pete's friend Pierre. So I stayed with another friend, and now Pierre he takes me in like we're best buddies, and all of these people I have been in communication with several times since I left. And as I came into Seattle, I get another call from Joe Shea. He says, "I've got a cousin that lives on a boat in Tacoma, and he's going to put you up while you're in Seattle." And unfortunately, I didn't take advantage of that. I'd already made other plans for Seattle. But this is just an example of where one tiny little instant in time that really didn't have any business ever happening. Joe got in his car because it was raining and he had been wanting to wash his car, and he thought, well, I'll just take it out in the rain and let the rain wash it off. When he got to the intersection, he said, "I didn't know if I should turn right or left. I usually turn left, and I thought, oh, today I'll go a different way." And because of that, I've met 5 or 6 people that I'll be friends with for a long time. Not to mention, I had nice places to stay, and it really enhanced my trip. And these things that happened were far and away the best part of the trip.
I think that you've nailed it there. When you're riding your bike on an adventure, you run into people. Number one, they are very curious about what motivated you to undertake such a journey. They want to hear all about it, how you started, how much weight you're carrying on your bike. When I go on weekend bike packing trips, people will stop and ask us, because it looks like we're going, to Chile or Alaska because we're carrying so much stuff. We're only going
Yeah.
overnight and we're going camping, but they're incredibly curious about your setup. You know, they want to know the technical stuff. They want to know where you're camping. how much weight are you carrying? What's it like when you're riding? But, but more than that, they take a human interest in you, and you have just exemplified that with those stories. A chain of events starting with one person who took a different route, ran into you, not literally, um, and then set you on a journey within a journey of meeting other people and experiencing the best of human kindness has to offer.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And it was consistent throughout the trip. Another thing that happened because I went further north, and the reason I went further north, the day that I was coming into Minneapolis, I was riding on the main road north, probably 30 miles south of Minneapolis, and I saw this sign to the left, and I don't remember exactly what the name of the place is. It's Hot Sam's Photo Garden and Antique Store or something like that. I know the name of it is Hot Sam's. And there were several times on this trip when I saw something and I thought, that looks interesting. And I had a debate in my head. Do I want to push forward and make the miles towards the destination I plan to get to today? Or do I want to take a chance that I won't make it, but not miss Hot Sam's? And there were a lot of times like that. And I tried to default to Hot Sam's. I tried really hard not to put any pressure on myself to make a certain destination and instead just to enjoy whatever was presented to me that day. And I'm glad that I went to Hot Sam's. Hot Sam's was this weird junkyard, and the guy that owns it is not Sam. His mother was Hot Sam, and she was one of the early female NASCAR race drivers, and that was her nickname. She was Hot Sam.
Wow.
And she and her son, her husband was a junk man. Her son became a junk man. He was like third generation junk man. And this park in Minneapolis is just stuff he's collected over the years, and he's kind of curated it. And so there's one area where he's got a little tiki bar, and it's all set up like the set of Gilligan's Island. And then there's an area where he has things from outer space, and it's everywhere. And people go in there and they take pictures. Well, I went in there on a bicycle and we started talking, and he and I ended up talking for who knows how long. I think I've got him on video for 20 minutes. So we must have talked for an hour or more. Just a really, really enjoyable conversation. Interesting guy, done a lot of things in life, full of love. Just about 80. I think he's a day older than my dad, so I think he'll be 80 in May. And his girlfriend came down to talk to us. And what I took out of my conversation with his girlfriend was that I had originally planned to leave Minneapolis, go to St. Cloud, and then go into South Dakota, which I think is what the Northern Tier route looks like. But she told me that if I was going to be that far north anyway, I really needed to see the lakes region of North Dakota, of Minnesota. And so, like I said, I tried to default to taking people's advice, and I tried to just let things naturally unfold, tried not to be in too much control. And so I decided that when I left Minneapolis, I would go further north than I originally thought. This gets us to it's a long route to get us to where I was going. I left Minneapolis. The next night, I went to Royalton, Minnesota, another warm showers host, had a great time with my warm showers host. And then the next day, I rode up into the Brainerd Lakes area, and I was riding on a trail up there, the Paul Bunyan Trail, I think. And I took a break about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was really tired and I just wanted to close my eyes. And on the side of the trail, there was a park bench. So I got off my bike, I laid down on the park bench, I closed my eyes, and I was laying there resting. And somebody came up and I heard them ride up. And I really didn't want to talk to anybody. I really wanted to keep my eyes closed. So I'm just laying there pretending like nobody's there. And she clears her throat. And so I opened my eyes and I looked at her. And it's a lady, and her name is Patty Clouk. And we started talking. And she said, "The reason that I am talking to you is because you're on my bench." And so every day she rides her bike to work and back, and she always stops and sits on that bench. So I was on her bench. So we strike up a conversation, and she asked me what my plans are that night. And where do you think this is going, Brian?
Another
She
host.
invited she invited me to her house. There we
Incredible.
are. She says, "We've got plenty of room. Come on home." So now she and I ride to her house, and it was funny because this ride had a good amount of elevation change on it. It's 12 or 14 miles. And we're riding along, and I am thinking, I know my bike is loaded, but this woman is kicking my butt. I mean, she is just leaving me in the dust, and she's older than me. I mean, she's like 63, 64 years old, and she's just cranking it out. And I'm riding hard. And most days I rode somewhere between 10 and 11 miles an hour. Some days I rode 8 miles an hour. Some days I rode 14, but most days between 10 and 11. And I'm cranking it out. I'm doing like 12 miles an hour, pounding up these hills. We finally get to her house, and I meet her husband, and I'm talking to him and everything. And I said, "I can't believe how fast Patty is on that bike." He said, "Oh yeah, it's an e-bike."
Uh,
He
uh,
said, "That's a cheater. She's got a cheater bike." But she didn't always ride a cheater bike. It's just what she rode to work and back. They are volunteers for a bike club up there, and they have done double centuries. They've done 200-mile rides,
wow.
which I think is really just incredible. But we had a wonderful experience that night. We had a great talk, spent the night, and we've been in touch 3 or 4 times since then. Just another example of, just some small little thing that leads to another little thing. And um, I spent the whole trip looking for good, and not one negative experience happened in 4,377 miles, and not a single thing happened that I wish didn't happen.
Well, I hope everybody that's listening to this will understand that it is not just an epic adventure, but it's a journey through the continental United States at a pace where you can be seen and be met and make new friends. And I think finding the good in people, I think that's really what it's all about. You can't do that when you're tearing across the country on an interstate in a car. It just doesn't happen. So I'm so glad to hear how good that experience was and how fulfilling. And I hope that inspires others to consider an epic journey like this as well. All right, let's go to Washington. You've crossed the state
Okay.
line near Spokane, I think, right?
I did, and by this time, I had been riding basically the northern tier route, so I had been running into cyclists. The only part of the trip that I kind of questioned my mindset is towards the end. I spent this entire trip letting it unfold and being really patient. It's the most patient I've ever been in my life. This trip was instrumental, I think, for me in developing more patience. And I think it's something I came out of the trip with that will stay with me. Um, but I started thinking about the end of it as I came into Washington. Montana had been 14 days of riding around mountains. Um, and then Idaho was just one day. In Idaho, I turned down the opportunity to stay with someone. A lady in Sandpoint, Idaho came up to me was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and asked me if I had ever heard of warm showers. And I told her that I had. And she said, "Well, I'm a warm showers host. If you don't have somewhere to stay tonight, you're welcome to come stay with us." And it was only 1 in the afternoon. And so I had been really programmed to say yes all the way up on this point of the trip. But I had started to think about finishing the trip, and I'd started to think about when I would finish it and making the miles every day. And I turned her down. I'd like to go back and accept that. Not that the trip was bad the rest of the way. It's just I was kind of in a hurry. And as part of that being kind of in a hurry mindset, I decided to go south after I entered Washington instead of continuing across that northern tier route that's up in the northern part of the state. I decided to go south to Spokane and then follow the I-90 corridor into Seattle. And it turns out, because I met some people coming headed east that had gone south because of fires that were all along that route. I didn't know about the fires, but it turns out if I had continued on my path, I probably would have had to detour south anyway. Um, but I rode down to Spokane. Spokane was 102 the day that I got there. That was the toughest weather day, I think, of the trip. It was just brutally hot. And like I said, I was getting in a hurry to finish. So at that point in my trip, I was thinking, I'm just going to ride Interstate 90. You couldn't ride on I don't know what most people think about riding on interstates. Where I live here in Atlanta, it's illegal. You cannot ride on the interstate. I don't think anywhere east of the Mississippi. I don't think there's anywhere you can ride on an interstate. West of the Mississippi, there are a lot of places that bicycles are allowed.
Yep.
And whenever I told somebody I was going to ride my bicycle on an interstate, I was greeted with shock and dismay and fear. But I did some interstate riding. Have you ridden on the interstate, Brian?
I've ridden on the 101 and I didn't feel unsafe at all. I had about a 10-foot shoulder that was free of debris. I didn't mind it at all.
Yeah, I kind of liked it for the most part. So that was kind of my plan, was I was going to go across Washington. There were the little area around Spokane, there were signs that wouldn't allow you to ride the bike on the interstate. But once I got past that, I was going to follow Route 90 and mostly just ride on Route 90 every day. And so I did a good bit of riding on Interstate 90 the next couple of days. Um, one of the interesting things in Washington State was I spent the night in George Washington. First of all, I just love the idea that there's a town called George Washington. A little disappointed that I didn't go out of my way to go to Joe, Montana, because that would have kind of bookended things. But I spent the night in George Washington. And while I was in George Washington, I decided to have dinner in the hotel I was in. It was the only hotel, it was the Mike Hotel. It was actually very nice. And they had a little bar and they were serving tacos. And so I went and I ordered some tacos, and there was a crowd of regulars. That's like the bar where you hang out in George Washington. And it turned out that one of the regulars there was the mayor. And I got to talking to all these people that were there. And the mayor went out to his truck and came back in, and he brought me a shirt from his campaign. It had his picture on it. And we did a quick video with me holding the shirt and talking to him. And at the end of the video, I surprised him and I kissed him on the cheek. So I kissed the mayor of George Washington, which which I enjoyed quite a bit. And I continued on the next day on the interstate. There is a mountain on the I-90 is headed west, and it goes down and goes across this bridge, and on the other side of the bridge there's a petrified wood forest, and behind that petrified wood forest there's a mountain, and on top of the mountain is a windmill farm. And the name of the mountain, Brian, one of my favorite parts of the trip, is Whiskey Dick Mountain, which I can't believe that there's a mountain and that's the name of it, but I find it fun. And I rode my bike, and Interstate 90 goes across that bridge. It didn't look like it did when I was looking at it from above, but it goes across the bridge. And one lane of 90 was closed for construction on that bridge. And if it hadn't been closed, I don't know how I could have gone across the bridge. It was very dangerous. That whole scenario was dangerous. I should have never been on that bridge. The lane of traffic closed got me almost to the end of the bridge because I just rode in the closed lane of traffic. But when I got to the actual construction part and there was a truck blocking it, there was highway speed traffic in the other lane. There was no way to go around, and I was just kind of stuck. So I waited, and after a few minutes, a car slowed down, turned on his flashing lights, and escorted me across the bridge. So I made it across the bridge, and when I got to the other side, I met another bicyclist, a guy in his 70s named Chuck, and he admonished me for being on the highway. He was very upset that I was riding on the highway, felt like it was dangerous, and he gave me a whole new route. And that route involved me climbing up over the mountain with the windmills that day. And I don't want to do it because it was a steep, it took me 2.5 hours of just going up. It was a several thousand-foot climb.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an easy climb. It was a long, gradual climb, but it was a climb. But like I said, I was trying to say yes to suggestions. I was trying to let things unfold naturally. And I wasn't enjoying riding on, after that bridge, I had a bad taste in my mouth about riding on Interstate 90. So I did what he told me. I climbed up over the mountain. And when I came down the other side, he said I was going to have a long coast. But the problem was that day and the next day, the wind gusts were 40 miles an hour right in my face. So when I came over the mountain, I got a 40-mile-an-hour wind gust hit me, and they're not allowing me to coast. I'm having to pedal down the mountain, and I'm still going like 9. I mean, it was really quite something, the wind that day and the next day. And what he had told me was when I got to the bottom of that mountain, I could pick up um, the Palouse to Cascade Trail, which used to be the John Wayne Trail. And parts of it are called the Iron Horse Trail. But I think the whole thing now is Palouse to Cascades. And it's not paved. And where I picked it up were these big, like riverstone rocks. And I have my tires are about that wide, and they're good for gravel, but they weren't good for this. It was really difficult. And so I got off of that pretty quickly and made it to the next town and spent the night. And then the next day, I didn't want to get back on that trail because it was so hard to ride. But he had told me that that trail would get me all the way to Seattle. So it was a mixed bag. And I
Mm-hmm.
decided to get back on the interstate. I get back on the interstate, 40-mile-an-hour gusts, almost unrideable. The gusts were blowing me off the highway, luckily not onto the highway, but off the highway, keeping me from riding. I rode 6 miles and got off at the next little stop. And I just sat and thought about my life for about half an hour, what the circumstances were that had led me to this situation. And that was a tough one.
Yeah.
But I decided I'm here. I'm not going to quit. I mean, I'm 100 miles or less from my goal. I have to finish. There's nowhere to stay. You got to do something. So I got back on that trail. I went and found that trail to see if it was any better, and it was. It was quite a bit better. And that trail, the Palouse to Cascades Trail from Thorpe, which is where I got on it, Thorpe, Washington, it ascends to the Snoqualmie Pass,
Mm-hmm.
but it's railroad grade. You cannot feel that you're climbing. And I was able to ride all the way to the Snoqualmie Pass and get up to, I guess, about 3,000 feet very easily. And the trail got better and better as I went. And I wouldn't have known about this trail. It's not something that crossed my radar, except for Chuck. I had decided I was going to ride on 90 all the way. And here's this stranger that has given me a new way to go, much safer, much nicer. You go through the Snoqualmie Pass that way. You go through a 2-mile railroad tunnel. So you've got light on either end. Other than that, it's dark and it's 30
Oh,
degrees inside. So that
Ooh,
was kind of a neat experience.
sure.
And when I came out of the other side, somewhere between riding into the tunnel and a mile or so on the other side, I punctured my rear tire. And I was about 12 miles from North Bend, Washington, where there was a bike shop. And one of the things I carried was an electric bicycle pump.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw a car parked. I borrowed their cigarette lighter power. I pumped my tire up. It was flat about a mile and a half later. I pulled out my little hand pump. I pumped it up. I did that 5 times because I felt like that was easier than unloading that bike and taking that rear wheel off and changing the rear tire. So the whole trip, I never actually changed a tire. The whole trip across the country. I had a few changed, but I never changed one. And that day in the bike shop, I met the lady that one of the partners in the bike shop, and she suggested that I come and spend the night at her house that night. So that day I rode to Redmond, Washington. This was by far the hardest elevation riding day of the trip, was riding through the Snoqualmie Pass into North Bend and Snoqualmie Falls, Washington, and then to Redmond. There are just so many hills and climbs, and a lot of them were just incredibly steep.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I got off and walked my bike that day, but I know there were multiple times that I thought maybe I should.
Yeah.
But I spent the night at Cheryl's house, Cheryl Tullis, and her son was there. And then the next morning, I got up and rode into Seattle. And Seattle had a big event that weekend. So the first bridge that I got to cross Lake Washington was closed. So then I had to do more climbing and make my way to another bridge. Uh, but I made it. I got there. I got to the Space Needle, and it was kind of surreal. It was just all of a sudden it was over.
Was there a letdown when you got there?
There was a letdown when I got there that lasted about 2 weeks. I
I've
am
heard that from many bicyclers that at the end of the ride, it's like, and there it is. And just
yeah.
like that,
Now,
it's over.
yeah. Now what?
Yeah.
And the difference in riding your bicycle all day, every day, and not really knowing what was going to happen. It's not that it's especially difficult. It's not especially difficult. You're just riding your bicycle. It's not scary. It's just unknown. It's just you don't know what's going to happen. It's interesting. Every day is interesting because even the things that are the same are different. Sometimes when you stop at a field with cows in it and you talk to the cows, they all come to the fence. And sometimes when you stop with a field with cows in it and you talk to the cows, they run away. Everything's different. It's different every day. And when you finish and you go back to normal life, and I'm the first to say I'm an extremely fortunate person. I mean, my normal life is, you know, a nice house, a hot tub, a beautiful wife, a cute little dumb dog, friends. I mean, I came back to just my normal, wonderful existence, but it was like eating food without salt on it because I knew for the most part what was going to happen every day. Not
Mhm.
because I didn't like it, not because it wasn't great, but just because I knew what it was going to be.
It's an incredible story. And thank you for sharing. I'm very inspired by what you encountered. And I hope others are as well, that um, traveling around the country on a bicycle is an adventure and you don't know what every day is going to be like. So, right there, you've interrupted your daily mindset, any routines that you've become wedded to, and now you're going to take it as it comes. And I really appreciate that's how you did it on a daily basis. You're like, let's see what happens. This person says go this direction. Okay, let's give that a try. Nothing bad happened. All good happened. Yeah, some challenges, some hills, some headwinds, the usual stuff.
Yeah.
But in the end, a major accomplishment. And again, I thank you for sharing it.
Well, I appreciate your interest, and I I have hundreds of hours of video footage. I mean, I guess I could talk about this for the rest of my life and not run out of things to talk about, things that I've forgotten even happened.
Well, listeners, go to twainingwheels.com, TWAINING wheels.com, and also Chris's YouTube channel at Twaining Wheels, and check out his videos and see him with the mayor of George Washington. That's one of my favorites. But he did a great job of documenting his adventure, and I think everybody would appreciate it. But there is nothing quite like a bike adventure, and certainly yours ranks right up there with them. So, Chris, amazing. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your friendship, appreciate your support, wishing you the best, and hoping to see you in person sometime soon.
I hope so, Brian. And just for the record, I there were no whammies on this trip.
That's awesome. Even though you tempted fate a couple of times.
I did.
Well, all good. Thanks again, Chris. Take care of yourself.
All right, Brian. Bye bye.
Bye.
Kissed the mayor and I liked it. His beard.
All right, I'm here in George, Washington, and this is the mayor. Juan, you're the mayor of George, Washington.
Yes.
And how long have you been the mayor?
6 months, 7 months.
How's it-
7 months.
How's it going?
It's going good.
What's the salary of the mayor of George, Washington?
$300
A year?
a month.
Wow!
It's a lot of money. I know it is.
How much of it do you spend here in the Microtel bar?
None.
Do you drink for free, or does Jeff pay?
Jeff pays. Yes, he does.
I'm very excited to meet you. This is the first time that I have met somebody on this trip that's in politics. Now, do you have a position on national politics?
No, I did not.
No position. Not willing to share.
No, I did not have.
Tell us where you're coming from, where you're going to.
Well, that's my video, so I mean, everybody knows I
Florida
love
to
I
Seattle.
love
All right,
Miami,
Juan,
and
where
I'm
are
on
you going
way
to?
I'm going from here to my house. It's only like maybe 10 minutes. Not even 10 minutes.
Do you want to get on your bicycle tomorrow and ride to Seattle with me? Tomorrow I'm going to ride to Clay.
Well, I got to work tomorrow, or else I
You got
would.
mayoral duties.
Yeah.
So I've got one more question.
What's that?
Besarte?
Besarte?
Yes.
Oh, Besame. Oh, shit.
And that's a wrap. Thank you, Mayor George Washington.